I I think I finally solved a problem. Hopefully, I don't know if you guys I don't know if you guys had the problem of the art social thing I was trying to create not working for you. Couple I don't know if you
I
tried it or
have.
not. But a couple people said they couldn't get into it. But if you go here, and I'll send a link again, this will be a good place for us to share some art. So this is Michael. You shared this. I shared the Houston thing. So
Oh,
this will be, so I just fixed it thanks to Michael actually kind of trying to get on and it wasn't working. So now you have to be a member. All of you should be members if you're doing this of this website. I'm using Wix. Anyway, so I think it'll be good for us to share this. This will give us kind of a robust discussion points of, and also something interesting. But why don't we start with Michael? We can't read everything, but art we liked this last week might be a fun way to start our discussions.
well, I chose this part from the opera Aida by Verdi, partly because it's a point of dramatic conflict
Mm.
and between romantic love, family, and country. And I was reminded of it from our reading and philosophy of sense of life. Of Rand talks about what a person finds important in life.
Mm.
And so her trying to sift through these conflicting obligations uh, and what's important to Aida, ultimately is with her love of Radames, over her father who's trying to save her from the Egyptians and the Egyptians that want to uh, theocratic state that's pressing down on them and
Yeah,
trying to separate them. So
I think that's a common conflict, but it's a great
yeah,
one, and it's that's what's interesting about great artists is taking something that's almost cliche and making it into something new and beautiful. Okay, anybody else? Great art or great art, contemporary art, any art that just moved you in the last week, 2 weeks? Just real quick,
I have something.
please.
Um, so just on a lark, I- I've I have been digging further into we have we're like all in on the Apple Music and Apple iCloud thing here with my wife and I, and so
Cool.
I was digging further into stuff in Apple Music, things that I normally wouldn't listen to, and just for kicks, just to see if there's anybody that directly um, it was inspired by it or called it out or named something about it. I decided to look for Richard Halley.
Oh,
So
okay, cool.
from Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah, that's from Atlas Shrugged. Yeah, yeah.
Didn't didn't find it. Didn't find like anybody who's like said, "Oh, this is our take on it" or something like that. Because they do have a lot of classical in there as well. In fact, there's a whole separate classical app that's really great.
But
But
what about Richard
uh,
Halley? I want to hear the music,
what?
not the what touched you about this?
Well, no. I didn't hear anything Richard Halley, but
Oh, okay.
one of the things that is suggested, just because it's as a similar name, was a singer, songwriter, and guitarist named Richard Hawley, Hawley,
Okay.
and he's the he previously did like some like Britpop kind of music. Like he was a guitar player in Pulp for a while. If you're into British like pop rock from the 90s and all, but his solo stuff,
You like the solo
uh,
stuff.
his solo stuff, he's kind of like Frank Sinatra with a guitar.
Okay. I like Frank
Like
Sinatra.
in terms, he's a crooner, his
Yeah.
voice, and
Got it.
I am just loving it.
Well, share it in the Arts Social if you
Yeah.
get a chance, because I'd love to hear it. Okay, maybe one
hmm
or two more real quick, and just the art itself. I just want to hear about the art real quick because I want to get into the essay. Anybody else want to share something that moved you that you liked? I'll say Dido's Lament. I shared it on Facebook. I'll share it on Art Social if you haven't heard that. Beautiful opera. That really moved me. I thought it was a great. a great one. Okay. So if nobody else, then we're going to move on into the essay. So philosophy and sense of life, a lot to talk about. This is one as a kid, I mean, in my early 20s, as a new getting into objectivism. The sense of life thing really became an obsession almost. And I think in a, not in a all the way healthy way, um, in certain sense where we could, and I want to hear your guys' experience of this. But first, as I like to do, what is your first impression of what's going on in this essay? And then if we have time at the end, we can talk about what we think is, what we've learned and developed in our understanding. Anybody want to try a first approach? Yeah, Michael, you're muted, by the way. Okay.
I think there's kind of three aspects to this essay. There's developing a sense of life.
Mm,
There's the need as going into adulthood of verifying one's sense of life with philosophy.
oh,
And
interesting.
then there's this third aspect that's kind of unique that she says when that philosophy is rational and you can have uh, an exultant certainty, I think she uses, and I just find it interesting that there's this emotional connection to
Mm.
certainty and knowledge. Um, and but otherwise, sense of life being this emotional sum of implicit beliefs starting in childhood. And
That's awesome. That's a great breakdown. That was good. Anybody else want to give a first stab at it?
Yeah, I can
Oh,
go. Oh,
please.
um, this is a very heavy, not just in terms of concepts, higher level concepts, but and broad ranging, broad scope. um, it is emotionally heavy because she is. It's. I swear, I keep reading this every time I read it. I mean, last time I just listened to it again in on Audible actually, but I was reading it before, prior, and it reads like a film noir, um,
Hmm, interesting.
because she's talking about if you don't put words to what the philosophy and the ideas
Mm,
behind your sense of life are, you're gonna pay for it,
yeah.
and it's such a the whole thing is such a concretization of why the primacy, like, well, this is a little higher level, but in terms of primacy of existence versus primacy of consciousness, why primacy of consciousness will never work, can never work, and
Mm,
you can only refer to reality with regard to, what your values are, what your philosophy is, and then finally your character development, your moral code. um Only reality is that's the only way that you can actually get through life, basically, with a positive sense of life.
yeah.
There's no other way. And uh she is so good. I mean, I'm just, I'm, it's almost devastating how blown away I am by this chapter.
After you've read it
Just,
many, many times.
yes.
Yeah,
The
I
more I
agree.
read it, the
It's
more
like,
I get out of it.
yeah, it's such
And
an interesting one. I mean, all of these are. But
she does mention psychology, but the whole thing is can be a roadmap to constructing a good way to help people out with psychotherapy, for instance.
mm,
Um,
sure.
and I love how she breaks down just all of the different uh, metaphysical like emotional and metaphysical counterparts to things that we feel, even when we don't have the words,
Mm,
because we have an implicit philosophy by the time, even in situations where we don't have the words for it,
yeah.
which is really, I mean, what a fantastic thing to point out. Those are my first comments.
That's great. No, that's you guys. I'm I appreciate that. I took some notes. If I don't know if I'll have time, it's nice to kind of try to reflect on anything we might have discovered along the way. And I'm already discovering new things. um, one of the things I remember is that, when I read, there was a period of time when I hadn't read this for a while, right? Like, I think actually before today, I hadn't read it for years again. Um, but it was almost like a Bible in my 20s. This whole book and the art of fiction was like a Bible to me. I read it over and over again. And there's a couple of things that really stuck out and that this lasted. Like if someone were to ask me, I would say this. And and that I thought about even outside of the context of philosophy and sense of life and like all these other things. And I was just curious, is there anything for you in this chapter in particular? The next chapter, it's pretty obvious, I think. We'll talk about there's one thing that everybody talks about. But here there's something that really stuck out to me even years after reading it when I hadn't read it again. What do you is if this is your first time, that may not be the case, but I'm just curious if anybody has something that really popped for you.
I from the very beginning, um, I was intrigued by kind of the comparison to religion.
Yeah, the
Um,
allegory. That's
yeah.
what it was for me. Is
Yeah.
that allegory was really
Hmm.
powerful of and because I think if you think about it, it's like it's almost like a throwaway in a sense because she's trying to set up something, but it's actually like really deeply profound. This idea that um every religion has these little anecdotes, stories, examples that they put into their dogma, their doctrine, and that a lot of them have some kernel of truth. They're getting at it incorrectly, maybe, or something's going wrong, whatever. And and then she gives the example of this sense of life, and then that is how she kind of go, goes into deeper discussion. But that idea of the primitive form of philosophy of this recorder and again, if you explore, this is how this was really, I want to say this real quick, Nick. This was really when I was young, one of those things that helped me open up my mind to other literature and art because it really showed me like, but there's so many of these things all over the world and everyone's getting at them in different and sometimes incorrect ways, but they're getting at something and they're trying to get at something. What are they trying to get at and what are they missing? And I just found this as it's like a throwaway for her. It's just like an example, right? It's just let me set this up, but it's like one of those things where it's like, what the, like that is, it's oh yeah, of course. I don't even know if she invented this idea. I don't. She probably this is like Freud and other people talked about this. But the way she succinctly put it was just very impactful for me, personally. Sorry, Nick, go ahead.
Just directly on that point, I think she did get it from someone. Harry talked about that one time on Meeting of the Minds. Um,
Oh, really?
Someone actually brought that up. I don't remember who though, but I think there was a different woman. But anyway,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, I don't think she
I'm
invented this whole idea, to be clear, but I think she succinctly wrote it well, and it is
hmm,
very profound and it's stuck with me. Go
oh
ahead.
yeah, and yeah, I'm just glad you brought this up because when I had read the first two paragraphs, I literally like stopped reading, put down the iPad, and just
Yeah.
closed my eyes for 15 minutes and just thought about
Thought
it.
about it. Yep.
It's it really is utterly incredible, and the way I really concretized the way it's so profound to me is that I feel like if you asked me like 5 minutes before I read this part, oh, what does Rand think of like this idea that there's this ever present, ever watching being, and it sees everything you do, good and bad, right and wrong, noble and vile. Like, what would Rand have thought about that? I feel like the answer would have been, oh yeah, she thinks like that's sort of nonsense. Like, there's nothing to that. Like, what do you mean? What do you think about that? She's an atheist. And then realizing, no, she does think there's something to that. It's not that there's literally a personality out there that's looking existentially at you, but that there is a thing like that. And
Yeah.
that thing like that isn't an existential thing, a personality. It's a psychological thing. It's the thing inside you. There's a thing
Yeah.
inside you that does that.
Yeah.
It's your subconscious mind.
It's about you.
And right,
Yeah.
it's you. Um, I think you is more directly the conscious mind, but yeah, it is you.
Yep.
And the way I further concretize that is like I imagine that coming up at an Ocon talk and someone like Ankar or Don or whoever um bringing this point up and me being like, oh my God, I totally did not know that. I did not think of that.
Yeah,
Um,
very, very
because this
profound.
does seem like something that they would have in their back pocket, like they would know. So it is really profound. It's incredible.
Yeah. Michael?
Yeah, she calls on page 21, the sense of life is not an irreducible primary, but a very complex sum. And so looking at it as a sum is this notion of a recorder that you get in the myth up front. Um, and the these stem from beliefs about what oneself and the world. And in 17, she says, even though such emotional abstractions grow into a metaphysical view of man, their origin lies in an individual's view of himself and of his own existence. Just to your point, that this is a personal progress. It's not some outside God being the recorder, but it's you, your own psychology, your own subconscious that based on your impressions of the world and yourself, it has this emotional atmosphere that's a sense of life. It's the sum, and she also points out that it's somewhat elusive to pinpoint down,
Yeah.
and that because it is a sum, and she says you can, as an adult, you can it's more difficult to change one's sense of life than not impossible,
As you get older.
you first
What
have to change your
why do you think that
beliefs to
is,
change the
by the way? Why do you think she thinks it's more difficult later in life? There's something I think about the nature of what she means by sense of life and how it operates that is easier in youth to change and kind of adapt. That becomes harder as you get
Yeah,
older.
I've got an answer for that, and
Yeah.
that's because there's more content to go through. More of the sense of life content, the implicit philosophy behind your thoughts and actions, and your explicit conceptually word, formed in words, idea of what your philosophy is.
Hmm.
There, if you're 20, you're not going to have so much life experience. If
Yeah, I
you're
think life
50,
experience. That's an important
you're going
one.
to have a
Yeah.
lot, and you're going to
Yeah.
have a lot to integrate and to question and to check all
Or
these premises.
disintegrate.
Yeah, or
Like
disintegrate.
untangle, right?
Yes,
Yeah, if you've been a Christian, a deeply Christian person for 50 years,
yes,
everything, because remember, she talks about, and here we're talking about emotional programming a lot of times. It's emotional generalizations you're making. And so, you're going to see this kind of marriage, even though you know that they're kind of miserable, but they're sticking with it or whatever. Like you're going to have positive reactions, like, oh, well, they stuck with it, they did their duty. You're going to have that kind of reaction to it. And so when you're in an existential crisis at 50 and you start questioning everything and you read Rand or something, that's hell to get through that, right? Like literally, I
yes.
think that's why people write about hell so much, is because that's what it feels like. And it's not easy, and it's just more difficult. And I think Ayn Rand's making some really interesting observations about the nature of sense of life. Yeah, Nick.
I think a good concrete to that is a lot of people's experience in reading The Fountainhead, and they think, oh, well, I want to be like Howard Work. I'm going to be a first-hander, and I'm going to think for myself, and I'm not going to go off what other people want me to do or say that I should do, like my parents or whatever. And then, like they're 19 or whatever, and they have to go to college, and they're thinking about what to do, and then their mom tells them or whatever, you should do this, and then you immediately go, oh yeah, for sure. It's like you just read the Fountainhead. You just said to yourself you weren't going to do that. And the reason that happens is because you just, even though you're only 19, you still have 19 years of
Uh-oh.
so like
What
there's
did I
the
freeze?
professed values and professed things you say you believe in, and the professed things you think are right and good. And then there's the what Gene Maroney calls, at least, the psychological values, which are like the things that you actually in your head, like in your brain, actually believe in, actually think is right and wrong, based off your actual actions and your most sincerest thoughts. Um, and so, like, it is like to put a succinct point on it. The reason it's so difficult is because you have your professed values, and they could be new, and then there's your psychological values, which you've been building up for years and years and years, that
Sure. And
ideally they should be integrated in the line, but
yeah.
unfortunately, oftentimes it's not the case.
Yep. And she makes this point on page 16, so we can move on, because this issue of the programmer is really important. Who's programming your mind? I always found that very profound and important. Um, and she says on page 16, the enormously powerful integrating mechanism of man's consciousness is there at birth. His only choice is to drive it or to be driven by it. And there's a lot of psychologists today writing about this kind of thing, and I think it's important to delve into and to understand is who's driving your consciousness, your mind, and your integrating factor, and how do you, how much control do you want to have? When do you, like for instance, I have times I think in the realm of art, I try to let go in a sense and let the author drive for a while, and then I think about it. I think it's one of the mistakes that I believe people who I've interacted with who are objectivists make is they want to drive it from the beginning, but part of the value of art is it's a safe place that you can kind of let go. Now you shouldn't let go completely, but I find that whole idea of driving versus not driving, when should you drive versus when shouldn't you drive, and she's obviously in this moment talking about the problem of evasion and just completely letting go in the world and just letting cultural osmosis kind of program you. And then she does this. I want to talk to you guys about this or get your views on this. So this is middle of 16. And I think, Amy, you kind of referred to this. This is when she kind of gives you concretes and then what she thinks are the emotional sense of life, right? Is that what you're kind of, and that to me
Yeah.
was really interesting. I'm curious your thoughts about her two two common denominators, right? She has one for the skies or the discovery, the adventure, the struggle, triumph, and then another category, folks next door, memorized recitation, family picnic, so on and so forth. And then she has two kind of. What did you guys think of those two generalizations she had? Again, bottom of 16, top of 17.
I have a thought with regard to Eddie Willers and Dagny
Oh, okay,
Taggart
interesting.
when they were growing up with Francisco d'Anconia. And if I can paraphrase it, let me know if I'm incorrect in this, if I remember right.
Like,
Um,
yeah.
when Dagny and Eddie were talking about Francisco, and um, they were talking about how they feel about Francisco in childhood
Mm,
as children.
yeah, that's
And
interesting.
Eddie said, and not to do any injustice to Eddie here, because Eddie is a
That's
very
all right.
good man. He's very
Yeah.
moral. Um, but he said, Francisco makes me feel safe.
Mm,
And Dagny said, Francisco makes me feel adventurous or energized, or there's a new challenge to be met. Um, and um, I thought of that. It
that's a
just
no. That's a. I didn't even notice that, and I think it's one of the great things about her novels that we miss some of those types of things about the characters. But I think it brings up a question I was going to ask you guys because I think this is something that happens a lot when people read Rand. Is so she talks about the folks next door, a family picnic, and then she talks about like for a man of self-esteem, the emotion uniting the things in the first part are admiration, exultation, um, and and the things in the second part are like guilt, resentment, fear. Do you think she's like against folk music and family picnics? Like, does she just hate family picnics?
I need to say right up front, I take what she likes and what she thinks is good artistically with a bit of a grain of salt, with a grain of salt, because she grew up in a time period that's a little bit different. She may not like 80s music as much as I do. For instance,
Yeah.
actually, we're going to find this thematically in this entire book about should I not should I not like rock and roll because Ayn Rand said this or whatever. I would not take that too much to heart. Um, and
Well, she
don't
says
start
very
throwing away your.
explicitly. She says very explicitly, I think, in another essay that there's it's not yet at the science level,
Yeah, with
where you
art and cognition and
yeah.
music, right? Um,
Sure.
but
But
yeah,
that
don't start throwing away your favorite albums.
But I'm actually trying to make, so I agree with what you're saying. That's an important point we need to talk about as we go through the Romantic Manifesto. But pretend for a second you just read this essay. You're a student or a young person just reading this essay. Do you think that that's what she's actually saying? Now, I can understand why somebody
No.
might misunderstand what she's saying because she's uniting these things and saying, well, the man of self-esteem is going to see these things as kind of like less than the man, of lack of self-esteem might see safety and enjoyment from them. But I
Mhm.
actually, and so I can understand that kind of slight misinterpretation. If you just read this essay, you didn't know the rest, I can kind of appreciate that and why we need, people to talk about it. But I actually think she's not doing that here, and it's a misinterpretation. Like it's someone's missing the point of what she's trying to say about these two things, about these two categories. Yeah, Michael.
Yeah, there's potential of reading it too literally, as far as
Yes.
advice, but I
Yes.
think
It's one thing.
what she follows with this is the description of what's important in life. And so these might be a reflection of what's important to her. Um, but yeah, the particulars might vary, is all I'm saying.
Yes, I think that's important, but I would important. But I would just say that like she liked tiddlywink music. We could use her as an example. And is that the most profound adventurous opera that's ever existed? No, but what I think she's trying to say is if your sense of life is only, you know, um, like the family picnic is the grandest time of your life in a sense, or the great emotion, and those are the heights in a sense. Those are the best that you can achieve or you feel towards. That's where it becomes a problem. It's not as though you can't enjoy common or folk music, but if you can't, or if like you enjoy folk music and you don't ever explore any other types of music and art, you don't enjoy anything else, and that's it. And there are some people who their whole life is just in 1970s to 1990s music, and maybe they'll hear like a modern song here and there. I mean, I would think that's the vast majority of people today, and they never experience Purcell's Dido and Aeneas. They just, and they can't even fathom it when they go that they're like, I don't get it. That I think is what she's talking about a little bit more. Does that make sense? So it's not like you can't, but are you and I've
You're
dated
saying
women.
you're character saying like where are these in your these are
Hierarchy.
like where are these in your hierarchy? Not
Yeah,
do they
that's
have any significance to you or not, right?
yeah, and
So
yes, I think it's just
yeah.
an important point that people misinterpret of her. Um, and she's not saying that folk music is the best and that you should live your life in folk music, but she's also not saying like, oh, if you enjoy folk music, you're a bad person. And I think that's how people interpret it. And I guess I'm just trying to point out what she's really trying to say about these two categories. And again, I'm sure you know somebody. I've dated somebody like this, that it's like all they can listen to is a certain kind of music, and that's all. They can never explore anything else. They've never heard of music before 1975 or something like that. And I think there's people like that. And it's like, to me, that's really sad. It's like people who only eat hamburgers or something. That's it. They don't eat anything else.
Mm.
Yeah, Nick. And I love hamburgers. To make my point, I love hamburgers. I mean, I love a lot of stuff. Amuse
For
bouche.
for just um specifically on the line of like for a man who lacks self-esteem, and then she talks about the evaluation of the things involved, the foggy landscape and folk music. I think the key word there is like for a man who lacks self-esteem,
Mm,
that person would have this kind of reaction to those things. But like that's very specific to that kind of person. She's not saying for people in general, the emotion should be, safety of passivity and reassurance. She just talked
yeah,
about this one specific category. And presumably then implicitly, the implication then being, and for a man of self-esteem, he would have a different reaction to those. And they're actually probably pretty positive, like rejuvenation, rest,
sure.
good times with friends. Like in the Fountainhead, Warwick, Mallory, Dominique, and the friend worker guy whose name Mike, I think.
Mike.
Yeah,
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 Mike.
Mike. Like they just hang
Mike.
around a stove pit, but they're having the time of their lives.
Yeah,
So I think that's also a good ski. Like if that ever comes up, I think the precision of her words is like the real way
sure.
to understand. Yeah, like she's
It's
not
also an
saying these things are
example.
bad.
So it's not like she's saying you if you do. It's just an example she's trying to make, right? But I agree with what you're saying, Nick. That's an important point. Now I do want to. I think we need to talk about the concept of important. She defines it. She gets a dictionary definition, so it's an important concept, and I think it's going to be important as we move forward. So what does she mean by important here? Because I actually, when I learned this, I was like, oh, I didn't realize. I That's right. That is a different way than I thought of it. Because she doesn't mean good or bad in a sense. Does not necessarily. So what does she mean by
Yeah,
important?
she mentions that that which is important to me, or the kind of universe which is right for me, in which I would feel at home. So it's not necessarily, something that is morally good or even life affirming or or something life sustaining. Um, it could just be, this is important to me, uh, and it's definitely a value judgment. And it Yeah, she goes on to say, important is basically what is signaling what your values are. And
Mm-hmm,
and then she finally goes into the integrated sum of man's basic values is his sense of life.
mm-hmm,
Um, but I love, love, love on page 18, the very up top, those quotes. It goes back and forth of like, it's important to
mm-hmm.
understand things, or it's important to obey my parents or be passive. Um, and she kind of goes back and forth to be between good and bad. And I love those statements because I think for all of us, and taking away from this chapter, you know, how can we apply this to our lives? I
Yeah,
think this is such an amazing roadmap to understanding your own values, your own epistemology, and of course, and and basically it's such a call to action, and for me the call to action is you need to understand why your values are important to you. Put it all into words. Don't
yeah,
just rely on your sense of life.
absolutely. Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, I think of when she's talking about importance, it's the connection between um, between ethics and epistemology, as Amy said, and metaphysics.
Mm,
Um, this is this is how those are wired up personally in any given person. Um, and this gets back to her definition of art as a selective recreation of, yeah, but we know the line. Um, that's again all about importance, but it's the sense of life that drives that. It's saying this, like you said, this is the world. This is something, an element of the world I want to live in. This is what I think is significant. Another word for important, significant. This is what I think is significant about reality. This is something that reality as it is and ought to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think bridging, she talks about it as a bridge, right? In terms of metaphysics. But I wanted to say one thing about this before we move on. But Michael, do you have something on this topic? On important?
Yeah, this and
Okay,
the previous, as far as
sure. Let's
looking
hear it.
at sense of life as what can you expect out of life? And just because she's so focused that this develops in childhood, just compare two different childhoods of living in a rural setting or an urban setting, and that if your existence is rural, like do you have exposure to different cultural things and so forth? Um, that oh, and that, like you're saying, like music before 1975, it's similar in that way. Like you have awareness of there's other types of life besides the one that I grew up with. And yeah, so
So
that's the expectation of life. And if you
yeah,
can
yeah.
find other things beyond that, and I was just thinking how that relates to what's important. If you're only staying with what's comfortable, what's known to you, like a rural life, for example, not venturing anything.
And so, I mean, one thing about the concept that I think is going to be very important to the discussion about art. This was another one of those really hit me when I first read it and really got me engaged in art because I was not engaged in art before this in my life. So she defines in that, when she talks about a key concept in the formation of a sense of life, she goes to the American Dictionary and she says it means, quote, a quality, character, or standing such as the to entitle to attention or consideration. That's what the concept means as such. It's kind of like a tool, right? But it's telling you to pay attention to this. Now, there's a TV show that I saw that I loved. I know a lot of people may not like it, but it's called The Last of Us. It's based on a video game. And there's a moment in the third episode when it's at the apocalypse and everything's gone to hell. Obviously it's years after the apocalypse. I don't know if anybody saw this. Things are starting to deteriorate. And there's these two lovers, and one of the lovers says they want to spend some of their resources to clean up some of the area so that it looks a little better. And then he says, you know, uh, paying attention to things is how we show love. And that paying attention part, what you pay attention to, that's what important is. That is what the that's how you show love, but that's how you develop your character. That's how you develop the world that you have and the worldview and your sense of life is what you pay attention to. And that's what important is. It's to say this is important and that's less important or not important. And this whole idea is we're gonna see this a lot in this book and in Ayn Rand's aesthetic philosophy, I think. And she may not define it over and over again, but it's so critical to understanding. When you look at a work of art, a painting, for instance, the fact that the woman is holding her hand like this versus like this is important. The artist is saying, pay attention. I did this on purpose. And that unlocked all art for me, is that the author is it. So I just wanted to really point that out as we move forward in this essay. Now, in the sense of life thing, you guys are all pointing out exactly the correct things about the why this is important is you're going to have this opportunity sometimes of reflecting on your emotions and your reactions to things. Why do you think this is why is your mind making you pay attention to this and not that? What's going on, and you have control over how you interpret and think about those two different categories, those different experiences. If you start having and if you're paying attention to how your mind works, you'll start noticing you're reacting to something over and over again and the same kind of thing and over in different ways. And it's like, well, why? Like, why am I mean, I just remember I there's certain commercials or stories and they just have like this deeply deep moment of like altruism of just helping somebody else. And I would just like start crying or something, right? And it's just like such a beautiful thing. It's like, oh man, what does that mean? Like, why does that do it for me? And that doesn't mean it was necessarily bad or good. I'm not trying to do that. It's a moment for reflection. That's the point. And I think that, Amy, when you're talking about all these, it is important to do this, is like, do you feel that way? When you're up against a moment, your family's trying to tell you to do one thing, it's like, no, 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 my life's important and we're not, right? And why? Okay. Again, that concept is so critical for art. Important. Yeah, you
Okay,
look like you.
can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, Amy and then
Oh,
Michael, and then we'll move on.
okay. Okay, just the fourth paragraph on page 18 is a scathing indictment of our of the irrational culture when kids are going through adolescence and
Yeah.
teenagers in high school, um, where they grope for ideas and self-assertion and principles and trying to figure out the world, um, and there's nothing to assist a young mind in this crucial transition.
Yeah.
And theirs is the agony of the unborn, of minds going through a process of atrophy at the time set by nature for their growth.
Yeah.
My God. When I said in the beginning, this is heavy. This is heavy. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
this
Pretty
is
heavy.
this is a
It's got a lot
this is
going on.
a there's a lot going on here.
And there's a lot to unpack. I mean, she doesn't go into details, right?
No.
She just like drops a bomb and moves on type thing. Now she does write, if you're interested in this, I would recommend reading the Comprachicos. I think
Yeah.
that's kind of, she writes about education. I think that's an important one, but Michael, go ahead. But you're right, Amy, this is deep stuff.
Just on the paying attention or what you regard as important. I like the part on page 17. What, in a fundamental sense, is entitled to one's attention or consideration?
Yeah.
Reality.
Yes.
Um, and I think, Amy, you were talking about that at the beginning. But it, it's important to have your beliefs tied to reality and to, a rational view of life. And I'll just add, like reality or existence or what you think is part of existence. And that's where I was going with my example of two different upbringings. Like,
Mm.
is it a lack of awareness that there is even an alternative to what you grew up with, like living in a city and not knowing farm life, or vice versa? But I'm just saying that there's more to existence. There's more to
Yeah.
reality than what you necessarily have in your background.
Which is why I always emphasize reading great literature throughout the world. Like I think I said this before, I'm in the Mahabharata tales. And I'm finding it fascinating to explore Indian values and how they're, whether you agree with all of them or not is not always the point. It's just seeing something, a totally different worldview, and it gets you out of your own worldview. It shows you like, oh, this is how it would be like living like this, living like, a 17th century Hidalgo who believes that he's a knight, right, in Don Quixote. Okay, so all super important stuff. I'd like you guys, so we have 15 minutes. So we got a good time actually. So I'd love to hear you guys trying to well, I won't say that. Distinguish between philosophy and sense of life. So Ayn Rand does kind of try to make some distinctions. She says on 19, philosophy does not replace a man's sense of life, right, which continues to function as the automatically integrated sum of values. But so what is she talking about when she's trying to distinguish a philosophy? Remember the first sentence I think is something like religion is a primitive philosophy, right? Is that the first? Since religion, not even since religion is a primitive form of philosophy. Many of its myths are distorted, right? So yeah, Nick.
I mean, in to give an integration that I got from Ankar from a talk he gave at OCON, he made the point that like there's metaphysics and then there's your implicit metaphysics, which is your sense of life. And then he made the point that there's your epistemology and then there's your implicit epistemology, it's your psycho-epistemology. And then he said there's your view of values, and then there's your implicit view of values. So there's something implicit going on, and that's your subconscious automatic
Yeah.
value judgments that, respond to your values and etc. Respond to your emotions. And so I'm bringing this up because the thing that philosophy and sense of life is about is the same. It's about metaphysics. It's about the big, deep, important questions about what does life have to offer me? What does existence have to offer me fundamentally?
Yeah.
I think the biggest distinction, like the fundamental distinction, is one of them is totally implicit, emotional, non-conceptual, non-rational, and the other one is the conceptual, hopefully, ideally, the rational, the conceptual, the thing in propositions, right? A string of concepts, statements, explicit, and the big mission in life is to unite them and make sure that, as she said, the mind leads, the emotions follow.
Can I jump in real quick?
Sure. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
appreciate what you said, Nick. I just want to make sure that we're
Mhm.
on the same page with just because you have an implicitly held belief, for instance, and it's not formed in words, doesn't necessarily mean that it's irrational. I think you
Yeah.
mentioned irrational in there, but so it can be rational, but
Well,
you can't rely upon just your sense of life or your emotional metaphysics to guide you in life because you're a conceptual being. So go ahead.
This
No,
this is
that's true. And when I was using rational, I just meant like non-concept, or
Mm,
whatever the word I use. I just meant
yeah,
non-conceptual.
an
Like this is
gotcha.
unconscious,
not a thing that's created or that's being
like
led by
purposeful.
reason. It's not,
Right.
yeah, it's not purpose or directed action. It's
So I think
just
this is
purely
an
off the reins.
important discussion to have. I mean, because I there's so much going on because I do think on some level you do need to be guided by your emotions, but long term you shouldn't be. Like think about in certain moments. You have to make gut decisions. If someone's coming at you, you're like, you can't be analyzing things. So there's certain short range things where, and like that's what love and art, like your first reactions are very important and useful, but you don't want that to be your entire guidance, like you said, Amy, of your entire life, and all the decisions are made on your gut and your heart, without your mind's, use. So it's an interesting interplay, but I think here she's just trying to make the distinction that a sense like you were saying, Nick, about the subconscious, the integrated sum of your emotions, your generalizations about the life is sense of life versus your philosophy, whether that's religion. If you're a Christian, you're going to have certain kind of beliefs, or a Muslim, you're going to have certain kind of things, or philosophical. But Mark, you've been waiting patiently.
yeah. Okay, and now I got some to say. Yeah, there's yeah, the whole thing of whether something is um preconceptual versus irrational, that's that's a question of method, and also implies it implies it assumes a mind to go through the process. So when you're saying irrational, well, is that irrational from the perspective of the mind um that holds the sense of life, or is it irrational as a judgment of another mind looking at that sense of life, another person? So that's a whole other question. um
Mhm.
but Rand says right in the third paragraph that sense of life is preconceptual metaphysics. It's yeah, it's kind of like um emotion is to reason. It is the it's this it's a shorthand. It's a shortcut to making evaluations, in this case evaluations in a metaphysical context of what, like we were discussing just earlier, what is important, what is significant, what is intentional, or what reflects my intention about about reality, about the universe. So it is this quick broad stroke of that sums if you haven't worked out a conceptual philosophy, it's just it's belief, it's this whatever you've immersed yourself in culturally or educationally, but it's not it continues to be part of your mental toolkit of dealing with reality in the same way that emotions do. Like Kirk, you were saying, emotion. You do not throw away emotions just because you've you've worked out long range rationally what you want to do. If you, in fact, the more that you do that, the more you can trust your emotions. Your emotions are,
Yeah.
end up being valid shorthand.
I do want to.
And the same sense with sense of life. Your sense of it, the more that you develop your explicit conceptual philosophy and integrate it into yourself, as opposed to just it being this thing that you want to be but isn't actually who you are, the more you can trust your sense of life.
Yes, and I just we can end. Well, Michael, get to your question or thought, but we can end this part. I think Ayn Rand does give you a quick overview or a quick phrase about what she means by philosophy here. And I think it's important to sometimes take her cues because she's not trying to give you like a formal definition of philosophy. She's what she says at the very beginning is philosophy, an attempt to offer a comprehensive view of reality. That's really what I think she's talking about. And that's why it could be, so there could be a formalized dogmatic way of doing this, like a religion, or there could be like an objectivist form or Nietzschean or whatever. But then there's sense of life, which is still a view of reality. It's a comprehensive view of reality and yourself in reality, but it's emotional. That's, I think, the distinction she's really trying to make. Okay, Michael, and then I was hoping to make one or two more discussion points here, but go ahead.
I just wanted to highlight a passage
Yeah, where are we at?
on page 20 at the bottom. She says regarding sense of life, um, since it is an emotional sum, it cannot be changed by a direct act of will. It changes automatically, but only after a long process of psychological retraining. When and if man changes his conscious philosophical principles. And I mean, just
Yeah, this was my next
uh,
point, so thank you.
okay, good.
Well, it's good. So you're moving us on. I appreciate that. This is the ending and most like I think the critical point of why this is in this book. Like, why did she include this here? And you're on to it. That's really important, right?
Yeah.
She says earlier we sense it as an irreducible primary. That's how we feel about our own internal sense of life. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, speaking somewhat personally, as far as having mistaken or bad beliefs, and changing them consciously, but you
As do
not
we all.
feeling the benefit fully kick in, for some time. It's that process
Oh, yeah, yeah,
of
yeah.
integration that Amy was alluding to. That,
Yes, that takes a
uh,
while, doesn't it? Some people
yeah,
don't make it through that, and they're like out of here.
Yeah.
And like and I don't, I can understand it's hard. I think they're wrong, but it's hard.
So philosophy just dealing with the conscious beliefs and the sense of life with the subconscious
And then this whole
beliefs.
love and art thing. So this is the last point we need to discuss for the last 6 minutes, because this is again why I think it's here. Michael, you just brought it up for us in the sense of, um, this these kind of the way we feel about it internally versus the way externally it comes about, and then we sense it and we get us like I'm sure all of us have had this feeling, whether it's with an artwork or a potential or current lover, of a really powerful emotion, like the most powerful emotion when it comes to the greatest art that we have, and then love of various types and our greatest love. And that's important. She calls art the voice of your sense of life. right? Now, not love necessarily. I don't think she says love is the voice because it's not really it's experienced that way. I don't think, but because it's not created in the same way. I mean, a person's character is created, but I think this is really important about what you've been saying, or we've all been saying here about the formation of our own philosophy and sense of life and how we can change it. Like she says, it's very difficult as you get older, but it's not older. The best question I ever heard in any literary course, and I've taken lots of literary courses at this point, was actually Peikoff, where he talked about in reading the play Antigone, and he asked this like of a couple other people. So not any performances, not plays, not movies, just with the words that you're reading, would you sleep with Antigone? And that was just so like, oh, whoa, that's such a weird, like an interesting question. When I'm reading the book Gone with the Wind, which is one of my favorite novels, I try to get Vivian Lee's face, who's a very beautiful face, out of my head and just think, would I sleep with Scarlett O'Hara, the character? Right? Like it's such an interesting question. And to me, that wraps all of this up into one piece because it's it's telling me like, okay, so I'm trying to understand what's actually being the voice of this artist and trying to, do I appreciate it? And then this character who has a sense of life, that it comes out and kind of speaks out of all this poor, do you find that attractive and or not, and why not? And then thinking about those two types of things. But then, obviously in real life, you don't want to be in the literary world with love and sex. You want to be in the real world. And in the real world, it's the same kind of thing. Now, of course, the real world's much more complex. So I'm sure a lot of us have had this experience where you get this very powerful emotion about some woman or man, and then it's like they turned out not to be that or something, right? But often, in my experience, there is something to that initial sense of life you got. There's just other things that are getting in the way, and that's not making it work out. But I always, as I get older, I trust my just talking about like love in particular, physical attraction. I trust it more because I've thought about, good, bad things over time. So when I'm single now. So when I see a beautiful woman and I get to know her a little bit and I feel something, I'm like, yeah, there's something, that's a good sense of what I've developed. And I think I trust that a little bit, talking about the trusting, the rational part. But I don't like getting married the second I see her. So that would be irrational. That'd be making a long-term decision the second I see, something. But anyway, last thoughts of love and art for you guys, and then we'll end. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I just see parallels between what she's describing as the integration of mind and values on page 21, that there's this exultant form of certainty. And then on page 22, she's talking about how when your philosophy can verify a romantic relationship, then and only then is it the greatest reward of man's life. So she has these.
Yeah, and that's an important one that is literally could write books about that for romance, and they do. Of like, it can't just be the feeling; you have to figure out how to put it into reality together. And yeah,
But the
it's like
unity
the
between
unity of it, and that's where everything goes
rational
wrong.
philosophy and sense of life, but
Yeah, yeah,
that put into to romance. So.
and that a lot of times that goes wrong in romance, I think. Which is why we have so many great romantic stories because there's a lot of conflict there. Okay, Nick, why don't you finish us off?
Oh, I was gonna.
Yeah,
I can stick around for a couple more minutes, but
Okay.
I do have to go at some pretty soon. So but go ahead, Nick.
just thinking about, I always try to think about why is a given chapter or verse or paragraph or whatever in a book in the
Yeah,
context of what I'm reading, and to just handle that question now at the end, like you brought up earlier, why is she going into a sense of life and like the subconscious and philosophy and metaphysics and all these things, automatized judgments and all of it. It was odd to get to this point at the end to explain why is it that we do have these intense emotions, good or bad,
mm,
positive or negative, love or hate, and everything in between, to given pieces of art. And that's like one of the biggest questions when it comes to talk about art. And most people are like, I don't know, like it just, I don't know, it is what it is. And no, it's like there's a whole reason for it. There's a whole theory, and sense of life is utterly pivotal to the explanation of like why do we have those big emotions. And that this chapter is of the theory, of the justifications, of the arguments that lead to her view that, and this is why you do have that big emotion.
Mm-hmm.
This is it. This is the theory. These are the reasons. And I guess it's just really easy to like think, yeah, why is this chapter in this book has nothing to do with art? But it really has everything to do with art, and that's what makes it
Yeah.
really cool.
Okay, Amy, you want to
Yeah,
finish
real
us?
quick. Again, I think it's so important. It's so wonderful. It was so lovely of Ayn Rand to write this book and give us a vocabulary for, not just art, not just love, but for sense of life. And that leads me to on a topic that I've been thinking about a lot lately is why it's important to view morality first, primarily as personal, as a relationship to yourself.
Mm,
Of all these metaphysical questions we're talking about here and dealing with here and talking about, it's important to introspect, it's important to understand, to make the implicit explicit. And all of this, it's important to understand why you love the values that you do and why you love the art you do and why you love the people that you do. It gives you this vocabulary. That's what Ayn Rand has done for me. It's given me the words to reaffirm my values in such a deep way. But in terms of morality, like most people think of it as something that's completely social and it has nothing to do with like your relation to yourself.
yeah.
No, actually does have everything to do with that and has everything to do with how you the metaphysical questions that you answer and about the approach to yourself, the approach to your thinking, what you think is important in your thinking and can you understand the world?
Mm-hmm.
Um so good. So thanks.
Yeah, no, thanks for being a part of it. Next, so 2 weeks from now, we're going to do art and sense of life. So I think it'll become more clear why she talked about this one to talk about philosophy and sense of life. And but if you're reading it for the first time, or if someone reads it for the first time, it's interesting how or reading it by itself because it was written and then as an essay and like the Objectivist or newsletter, and then compiled in a book. Um, okay, so by the way, next time I might need to move the time up a little bit because I have a performance that day. So if that's okay with everybody, I might
Well,
hopefully that
I
works.
might be late if that's the case.
Okay, what time? Well, we
Wait,
can
what do you
talk
mean? Like earlier, you mean, or
in the
later?
day, earlier in the day.
Oh, okay. Earlier in the day, I might be late because
Okay.
I have a flamenco dance class at a few hours prior to this. So yeah.
What's okay, everyone, by the way, if you need to leave, you can.